A ridge in late October. The wind comes down off the granite like something with a memory. Below it, a stone cottage, smaller than a barn, older than the road that almost reaches it, the roof half gone, the chimney leaning. A house the town has called the grave for 50 years. The door pushes open. Inside, a woman kneels at a cold hearth. Her hands are black to the wrist. Her hair is shorter than she ever wore it. Her last match flares once, and in the brief flare her knee shifts. A flagstone moves, not a wobble, a movement. The kind of movement that a floor does not make. The kind of movement that means somebody once cut a line there with a chisel and meant for it to be found. The match dies. She does not move. In the dark, somewhere very far below her, the air shifts. The door closed. Not slammed. Closed. Soft. Final. The kind of sound a coffin makes when the lid comes down for good. Maren Holloway stood on the porch of the only home her children had ever known, and for a long moment she could not feel her own hands. The wind came up from the south pasture, cold for October, smelling of frost and turned earth and something else, something like an ending. Caleb, who was 8, set his jaw, just like his father used to. That small, stubborn line that said, "I will not cry. I will not cry. I will not." Junie, who was 6, pressed her wet face into the side of Maren's coat. She had run out of words. She had been crying for an hour. The suitcase at Maren's feet held a decade of marriage. One suitcase. 10 years. She tried to remember what she had packed. A photo album. Bennett's old flannel, the green one. Junie's stuffed rabbit with the missing ear. A wooden box of letters. The good coffee mug. Because the good coffee mug mattered somehow. Even now. Especially now. The mind grabs strange things when the world ends. Behind her, inside the house, a man cleared his throat. Polite. Patient. The kind of patient that wasn't patient at all. Conrad, her husband's brother. Now the master of everything Bennett had ever loved. "You'll want to start walking, Maren," he said through the closed door, "before the children get cold." She did not turn around, because if she turned around, she would see him. And if she saw him, she would put her hand through a window. And if she put her hand through a window, the children would scream. And if the children screamed, Conrad would call the sheriff. And the sheriff was Conrad's poker friend. So she did not turn around. She picked up the suitcase. She picked up Junie. She held Caleb's small, cold hand in her free one. And she walked off the porch of her own life. Bennett had been dead 6 months. 6 months and 4 days. A tractor had rolled. That was all. A tractor. 40 years old, kept running by tape and prayer. And one afternoon in April, it had simply tipped sideways on the slope behind the barn and crushed him under it like he was nothing, like a decade of love was nothing, like 2 children waiting for their daddy to come home for supper was nothing. She had been the one to find him. She would never tell anyone what she had seen. The will had been read in a lawyer's office that smelled of old coffee and cheap cologne. Conrad had sat across from her in a new suit. new for the funeral, still creased at the shoulders from the store. The lawyer was a small, nervous man. He had not looked at her once. The will was written in 2011, he said, before the marriage. The deceased never updated it. She had laughed. Because that could not be right. Bennett would have. Bennett would have. He loved her. He loved the children. He had even talked just last winter about putting the farm in her name. Mrs. Holloway. It's wrong, she said. It's wrong, he told me. He told you a lot of things, sweetheart, Conrad said. Mild, reasonable, the way you'd talk to a child who'd lost a balloon. But this is the document we have. She had stared at her brother-in-law across the table, and for the first time in 10 years, she had seen him clearly. The farm, the house, the land, the truck, the savings, the dogs. Everything Bennett had ever touched. To Conrad, Maren walked. The road from the house ran down past the south pasture and the broken silo and the apple tree where Bennett had once kissed her in the rain. She did not look at the apple tree. She did not look at anything. Junie was getting heavy. Maren shifted her to the other hip. Caleb tried to take the suitcase. He could barely lift it. I've got it, baby. I'm strong, Mama. I know you are. I can. I've got it, Caleb. Her voice came out sharper than she meant. He flinched. She softened, knelt, set down the suitcase right there in the middle of the gravel road, took his small, serious face in her hand. I'm sorry. Mama's sorry. You are strong. You're the strongest boy I've ever known. But right now, I need to carry the bag. Okay. He nodded, slow, 8 years old, and trying not to cry. Where are we going? She did not know, so she said the only thing she could say. Somewhere new. The envelope was in her coat pocket. 5 $100 bills, crisp, untouched. Conrad had pressed it into her hand on the way out. His skin had been dry, cool. The hand of a banker, not a farmer. This is more than the law requires, he had said. Some would say more than you deserve. Find a place in town. Or better yet, go south. It's no country for a single woman with 2 kids out here. $500 for 10 years of marriage. For every casserole she'd carried to a sick neighbor under the Holloway name. For every dawn she'd milked the cows when Bennett's back was out. For every load of his laundry. For every meal she'd cooked his brother when his brother came around hungry. $500. Some would say more than you deserve. She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had taken the envelope. Because the envelope was for the children. Because food was for the children. Because pride was something people who still had a roof could afford. But she would remember the way he said deserve. She would remember it for the rest of her life. The county clerk's office was a brown brick building on Main Street. Maren walked in with 2 children and 1 suitcase in the eyes of a woman who had not slept. The clerk behind the counter looked up, took her in, said nothing. I need to see the list of tax foreclosures. He blinked. Slow. Ma'am, the cheapest one, whatever it is. You'll want to sit a moment. Get the children some water. There's a fountain by the cheapest one. Please." Something in her voice made him stop. He went behind a partition, came back with a thick paper ledger, heavy, cracked at the spine. He set it on the counter like he was placing a coffin. "You can look, but I'm telling you now, most of these are scrub. Nobody wants them for a reason." She opened the book. Junie pulled at her sleeve. "Mama, I'm thirsty." "In a minute, baby." "Mama, in a minute." She ran her finger down the column, past the 4-figure prices, past the 3-figure prices, past the rocky lots, and the floodplains and the parcels marked no road access. Down, down, to Lot 74, 5 acres, Whisper Wind Ridge, Structure 1 stone cottage, condition poor, $450. She looked up. The clerk had been watching her finger. His face changed when he saw where it had stopped. "Ma'am, no." "Why not?" "That place is. People call it the grave, ma'am. Nobody's lived up there in 50 years. The wind never quits. The soil's all rock. There's no well. There's no road hardly. It's the highest spit of ground in 3 counties, and the worst. How much is left in the deed transfer after the 450? Ma'am, please. With 2 kids. How much?" He let out a long breath, pulled out a calculator, tapped. $42 in fees. "I'll take it. Ma'am, I'll take it. Today. Now." He looked at her. Then he looked at the children. Then he looked for a long moment at nothing at all. Then he reached for a form. "Yes, ma'am." The paper trail took an hour. Caleb sat very still on the wooden bench by the wool. Junie fell asleep against him with her mouth open. The clerk slid forms across the counter, and Marin signed her name on every line he pointed at. Marin Holloway. Marin Holloway. Marin Holloway. Each signature smaller than the last. When it was done, he handed her a thin folded paper, yellow at the edges, stamped with a faded county seal. The deed. "You'll want to walk it before dark," he said. "It's 2 miles up from where the gravel ends. No way to drive it past the 2nd cattle gate." "Thank you." He hesitated. "Ma'am, the Hollister place. That's what it was. Old Man Hollister. Before it was the grave, it was the Hollister place. My grandpa used to say the man who built it was a madman. Just so you know what you've got." She had already turned toward the door, but she paused. "Hollister. That's right. Spelled how he told her. She wrote it down on the back of the deed. Why she could not say. Something in the sound of the name had caught on something in the back of her mind. A burr on wool. A small snag. Then she gathered her sleeping daughter into her arms and walked out into the afternoon. The road ended at a wire gate hanging on one rusted hinge. After that, a dirt track. After the dirt track, a goat path. After the goat path, just the spine of the ridge itself. A long sloping shoulder of granite and dry grass, climbing up into a sky the color of cold iron. The wind hit them at the second bend. It was not like wind in the valley. It was not weather. It was a presence. something with shoulders. It came down off the ridge in long, shoving waves, and it tore at their clothes, and it stole the breath right out of Marin's mouth. Junie was awake now, and screaming. Not crying, screaming. The high, thin scream of a child who has run out of every other sound. Mama, Mama, I want to go home. I know, baby. I want Daddy. I know. I want Daddy. I want Daddy. I want Daddy. Marin stopped walking, right there on the path. She set down the suitcase. She pulled both children against her. She put her hand on the back of Junie's hair, and she pressed her own face against the top of Caleb's head, and for a long minute she could not move. Because Daddy was not coming. Because Daddy was under the apple tree in the cemetery behind St. Anne's where the grass was still raw over the dirt. Because she did not know how to do this. Because she did not know how a person was supposed to do this. The wind blew harder. The grass on the ridge lay flat. Mama, Caleb said, quiet, close to her ear. Mama, we have to keep walking. It's getting dark. He was 8 years old. And he was right. She lifted Junie. She picked up the suitcase. She kept walking. They saw it at the top of the third rise, a tumble of gray stone clinging to the side of the ridge like something the earth was trying to shrug off. The roof was half gone. The chimney leaned. The mortar between the stones had crumbled in a dozen places, leaving dark gaps that looked like missing teeth. There was no garden. There was no fence. There was no path to the door. There was nothing but rock and wind and the ghost of something that had once been a house. Caleb stopped walking. Junie stopped crying. The wind did not stop. It just kept coming, the way the wind on the moon would come if the moon had wind. Pure, indifferent, without mercy. Mama, Caleb said. She could not answer him. Mama, is this it? She could not answer him. She set the suitcase down. She set Junie down. She walked slowly across the broken ground toward the wreck of a cottage that her name was now on. The door was made of plank wood, split and gray hanging open. She pushed it. It groaned. Inside, one room, stone walls, a dirt and flagstone floor, a black hearth filled with the bones of a long-dead fire, a small alcove off the back where someone had once slept, a square window with no glass. That was all. That was the house. That was the answer to 10 years of marriage and $500 and a brother-in-law's smile. Marin stood in the middle of the room and she put her hands over her face, and she did not make a sound. She did not make a sound. She did not make a sound. Because if she made a sound, the children would hear. They slept that first night on the floor in their coats. She had hung the tarp from the suitcase across the worst of the holes in the roof. She had built a fire with sticks the children gathered. The fire burned poorly. The smoke went sideways. Half of it came back down into the room and stung their eyes. Junie cried in her sleep. Caleb did not sleep at all. Marin could feel his small body stiff against her side. His eyes open in the dark, listening to the wind. She lay awake. Hour after hour. watching the small red eye of the fire die down to nothing. She thought, I have made a mistake. She thought, I have killed my children. She thought, Bennett, 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 Bennett. She thought, I will go back tomorrow. I will go to the sheriff. I will go to the church. I will go to anyone who will take us. But she knew that the sheriff was Conrad's friend, and the church was where Conrad sat in the third pew every Sunday with his hand over his heart. And anyone who would take her in this town would have to look Conrad in the eye on Main Street the next morning. And no one in this town would look Conrad in the eye on Main Street. So there was nowhere. So there was only here. The wind came down through the hole in the roof and touched her face like a cold hand. The first 3 days went like this. She patched the worst of the roof with the tarp and rocks to weigh it down. The patching nearly killed her. She had to climb on a ladder of split boards she pulled out of a fallen lean-to. The ladder broke twice. The second time she fell 6 feet onto her back and lay in the dirt, unable to breathe for a full minute. She did not tell the children. She got up. She climbed again. She chinked the worst gaps in the stone walls with a mixture of mud and dead grass. Her hands cracked. Her fingernails split. By the second day, she had blood under every nail. She hauled water in a tin pail from a sluggish, iron-tasting spring a half-mile down the slope. The pail leaked. By the time she got back up the hill, half the water was gone. She fed the children dry bread and beans cooked on a fire that smoked more than it burned. She did not eat herself. She lost 3 pounds in 3 days. She did not cry. On the 3rd day in the afternoon, Caleb came running into the cottage, out of breath. "Mama, Mama, a man." She came out fast, wiping her hands on her coat. He was already at the corner of the wall. An old man, tall, stooped, a face like creased leather, a wool cap pulled low, a burlap sack over one shoulder. He stopped at the edge of what should have been a yard. He took off his cap. "Ma'am." "Yes." "Name's Whitaker. I'm down off the east slope." "The Whitaker place?" "Yes." "Saw smoke?" "Yes." He looked at her, long, slow. The way men of a certain age look at things, like he was reading her the way other people read a newspaper. "You're the Holloway widow." She did not know what to say to that. He nodded as though she had answered. "Mind if I set this down?" He did not wait for her to say yes. He lowered the burlap sack onto the flat rock by the door. Then he straightened, and his old joints made a small, soft sound. Potatoes, some carrots, half a slab of bacon, a jar of my wife's apple butter. Won't last forever, but it'll get you the week. I can't. Yes, you can. His voice was not unkind, but it was not negotiable. She closed her mouth. He looked past her at the cottage. His eyes moved across the stones, and something in his face changed. Just slightly. The way a man's face changes when he sees an old friend he wasn't sure was still living. "This place," he said, slow. My mother was born inside these walls. Marin stared at him. Ma'am, my mother. She came up here as a girl to help an old woman who lived alone, Mrs. Hollister. After Mr. Hollister passed, my mother said the house was warm in winters that killed cattle 2 valleys over. She never could explain it. He looked at her. His eyes were the color of weak tea. Folks down the hill don't remember things right. They call this place the grave, but my mama called it the hearth. The wind moved across the ridge. He set his cap back on his head. You're not alone up here. I just want you to know that. Whatever they told you in town, you're not alone. He turned to go. Mr. Whitaker. He stopped. Why are you helping me? He thought about it. He thought about it for a long time. Long enough that she began to think he would not answer at all. Because somebody helped my mother once, he said. Finally. And the world hasn't been the same since they stopped. Then he walked down the slope. And he did not look back. She held the sack of potatoes against her chest like it was a baby. She did not let the children see her cry. The storm came on the 7th night. Not a winter storm. Too early for that. But a hard, cold rain driven sideways by the kind of wind that finds every crack and prise. It came down through the chimney first. A long, wet gust that hissed across the fire and threw a cloud of acrid smoke up into the room. The fire died, just like that. Junie woke up coughing. Caleb sat up wide-eyed. Mama, it's okay. Stay there. Stay there, baby. She crawled across the floor to the hearth. The smoke was thick. Her eyes ran. She fumbled for the matches. The matches were damp. She struck one. Nothing. Another. Nothing. The wind shrieked through a gap in the wall she had not chinked well enough. A long howl. A wounded animal sound. She struck another match. It hissed. Caught. Died. The room was getting cold. Fast. She scraped frantically at the ash, trying to find an ember. Anything still warm. Anything still alive. Her hands went black to the wrist. The ash was already cold. The fire was already gone. Mama, I can't see. Just a minute. Just a minute, baby. Mama's getting it. She struck another match, and in the brief flare of light as she leaned forward to push the small flame down into the ash, her knee shifted, and a flagstone moved, not the way an old stone in an old floor moves when you step on it wrong. Not a wobble, not settle. It moved. A full inch. Sideways. With a soft grinding sound under her knee. She froze. The match burned down, stung her fingers. She dropped it. Dark. She knelt there in the dark with her hand on the flagstone, listening to her own breath. That's not right, she thought. That's not how a floor moves. She struck another match, the last one in the box, held it close. The flagstone at the base of the hearth was set into the floor like all the others, heavy, wide, 2 feet by 3 feet easy. But it was sitting just a hair higher than its neighbors now. and along one edge, a line, a black line, a gap, as thin as the edge of a knife, straight as a ruler. Not the kind of gap that happens by accident, not the kind of gap that happens in 100 years of settling stone. The kind of gap that happens because somebody once cut it that way. The match died. She did not move. Mama, Caleb was at her shoulder. She had not heard him come over. Get the candle. Mama, what? Get the candle, Caleb. He scrambled, found it, brought it. She lit it from the second to last match in a smaller tin she kept in her coat. The flame jumped, held. Caleb knelt beside her. Junie crawled over too. The three of them in their coats on the floor of a ruined cottage at the top of a ridge in the dark, looking down at one strange stone. Maren wedged her fingers into the gap. She pulled. Nothing. She braced her boot against the hearth, pulled again. Her shoulders shook. Her arms shook. Something in her back popped. The stone grated. An inch, 2 inches. Then, with a long, groaning slide, it slid all the way to the side. And underneath there was not dirt. There was not the cold, packed soil under an old floor. There was iron, a dark slab of iron, perfectly flat, perfectly square, set into a stone frame the way a window is set into a wall. And in the center of the iron slab, a ring. A heavy iron ring flush with the surface, black with age, polished smooth in one spot where once a hand had gripped it many times. Caleb made a small sound in his throat. Junie said, "Mama, what is it?" Maren did not answer, because she did not know. Because in 10 years of marriage and 1,000 stories about old farms and old houses and old land, she had never heard of any farmhouse in this country having a trap door of iron set into the floor under the hearth. A root cellar would be wood. A root cellar would be down the back stairs. A root cellar would not be hidden. She reached for the ring. The iron was cold. Not the cold of metal in a cold room. The deeper cold of something that had not been warmed by a human hand in a very long time. Decades. Maybe longer. She gripped the ring. She pulled. It did not move. She braced both feet, both hands. She put her whole body into it. Her arms screamed. Her back screamed. The trapdoor did not move. She let go, sat back on her heels, sweating in the cold air. "Mama, let me try." "No, baby, it's too heavy." She looked at the ring again, at the way it sat, the polished spot. She tilted her head. Then she gripped the ring with both hands. And instead of pulling straight up, she pulled toward her, across, like a man pulling a heavy bow. The iron slab groaned and lifted, just an inch. But it lifted. She gasped, adjusted, got her shoulder under, heaved. Slowly, slowly. The trapdoor came up, hinged on the far side, opened like a thick black mouth. She let it fall back against the stone with a deep, heavy thunk that shook the candle flame. The three of them leaned forward. The smell that rose to meet them was the strangest thing about it. It was not the smell of an old cellar. It was not damp. It was not rot. It was not the breath of mice or rusted tin. It was cool, dry, clean, with a faint mineral edge, like the inside of a cave, like a stone you had just split open with a hammer, like nothing in the world had touched this air in 50 years. The candle flame did not flicker. The air below was perfectly still. Caleb whispered, "Mama, is it a cellar?" "I don't know, baby. Are we gonna go down there?" She looked at her son, at his thin, small face in the candlelight, at the wide, serious eyes that had not slept in a week. "You are not gonna go down there. I am going to go down there. You are going to sit right here with your sister and hold this candle until I come back up. Mama, Caleb, do you understand me?" A long pause. "Yes, Mama." She lit a second candle from the first, pressed her son's fingers around the holder, touched his cheek. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, you come to the top of the stairs and you call my name. Just the top. Do not come down. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Mama." She kissed Junie on the forehead, then Caleb. Then she put her foot on the first step. The stairs were stone, tight, steep, narrow. The candle in her left hand shook so badly that her shadow on the wall danced like a drunk man. 5 steps, 6, 7. The air got cooler, but not colder. The way a basement gets cooler. The way a deep place gets cool because it is deep, not because it is cold. 8 steps. 9. Her foot came down on flat ground. She lifted the candle. She was standing in a small round chamber, maybe 8 feet across. The walls were fitted stone, but not like the rough stone of the cottage above. These stones had been cut, each one set against its neighbor with a precision that did not seem possible from the time before machines. The seams between them were so fine you could not have slid a sheet of paper between. The floor was flat, smooth. The air did not move. And in the center of the chamber, a table. A heavy oak table dark with age, square, with 4 legs carved like the legs of something a master had made on a winter night, just for the love of the carving. On the table a book, a leather-bound book the size of a family Bible, open, lying flat, as though somebody had been reading it, and then stepped away for a moment, and then never come back. Beside it a small wooden crate, and tucked under the corner of the book, half hidden, a square of paper. A photograph. Marin stepped closer. The candle trembled in her hand. She set it on the table. She made herself take a slow breath. She bent over the book. The handwriting was a flowing copperplate, faded but readable. An ink that had once been black and was now the color of old tea. The inscription on the open page read, "The last will and testament of my mind. Ezekiel Hollister, mason and engineer. The year of our Lord, 1888. The next page in the same hand. A house should breathe with the earth. A house should be a living thing. A house should not need fire to give warmth. A house should not need man to defend it from winter. A house should be built to keep itself and the souls within it against every storm that ever comes. She read it twice. She read it a third time. Something tightened in her chest. Hollister. The clerk had said Hollister. She had written it on the back of the deed. She had not known why. Slowly, she slid the photograph out from under the corner of the book. It was small, sepia. The edges curled, the corners soft with age. Two figures. A man standing, bearded, severe. The high collar of his time. The dark suit. The kind of stare that meant he had held still for 30 seconds while the camera plate did its work. And beside him sitting, a woman in a long pale dress, her hands folded in her lap, her hair pinned up high in the style of the 1880s, her face. Marin's hand went to her own mouth. She knew that face. She knew the line of that jaw, the set of those eyes, the small downturn at the corner of the mouth that she had seen every morning of her childhood across a kitchen table in a small house in another county 400 miles away. She knew that face because she had spent the first 18 years of her life looking into it. It was her mother. Except it could not be her mother, because the photograph was 140 years old, because the woman in the photograph had been dead for 100 years before Marin's mother had been born, because the woman in the photograph was sitting in a wedding dress next to a man named Hollister. The candle on the table guttered, burned low. Above her, faint as a thread, she could hear Caleb calling down through the dark. Mama. She could not answer. She was looking at her mother's face in a photograph from 1888, and somewhere very far away the wind on the ridge above the cottage rose to a long, low note. Almost a voice, almost a name. She would not understand what she was looking at for many more days. But standing there in the cold stone chamber, under the floor of a house she had bought for $450, because she had nowhere else in the world to go, she felt for the first time since the door of her old life had closed behind her something that was not despair, something quieter than hope, something older, like a hand on her shoulder, like a voice that had been waiting 138 years to say, "You're home." She picked up the photograph. She held it against her chest. And from the top of the stone stairs, her son's voice came down again. Small, frightened, loyal. Mama. Mama, are you okay? She closed her eyes. She breathed. She answered him. Yes, baby. And for the first time since she had said the word in 6 months, it was almost true. Mama's okay. She slept with the photograph against her heart, not in her pocket, not under the pillow, against her skin, inside the worn flannel that had been Bennett's, pressed flat where her breastbone met her ribs, because if she set it down, it might disappear. Because if it disappeared, she would not know if she had imagined the whole thing. She did not sleep much. She lay on the floor between her children, and she stared up at the dark beams in the holes that were now patched with tarp and rocks. And she thought about the face in the picture. her mother's face. Her mother's exact face. Except her mother had been buried in another county 6 years ago. Except the woman in the photograph had been dead 100 years before that. Except. She got up before dawn. She built a small, careful fire. She gave the children dry biscuits and the last of the apple butter. She told them she had work to do downstairs. She told them they were not to follow. Caleb's eyes were already on the floor where the trapdoor sat. The flagstone she had wrestled back into place. The thin black line of the gap. "Mama, is it a treasure?" "I don't know yet, baby." "Is it scary?" She thought about that. "No," she said. "It's not scary." Then she lit her candle, and she lifted the stone, and she went down. The journal was where she had left it. So was the wooden crate. So was the heavy oak table. So was the perfectly still air. So was the chamber exactly the same. Untouched in 50 years and untouched still, except for the small disturbance her own hands had made the night before. She sat down on the cold stone floor with her back against the wall, and she opened the book. She read for 3 hours. The pages were thick. The handwriting was dense. The diagrams were drawn with the patience of a man who had nothing better to do than draw beautifully. And what she read, she did not at first believe. Ezekiel Hollister was the man who had built this cottage. But he had not built it like other men built houses. He had built it like a machine. He believed, he wrote in the slow, careful sentences of a man arguing with the dead, that a house should not need to fight the weather, that the constant burning of wood and coal in the homes of his neighbors was a kind of madness, that the earth itself just a few feet beneath the surface held a steady, mild warmth all the year round. Summer, winter, it did not matter. The earth's temperature down where roots and stones lived never changed. And if a man were clever enough, and patient enough, and humble enough to learn from the badger and the rabbit and the bear in its winter den, then a man could build a house that breathed with the earth, a house that drew cool air down through a long vent on the cold north side, a house that ran that air slow and steady through stone channels deep beneath the floor, a house where the earth itself warmed that air gentle as a hand before it rose up through small slats in the floorboards and into the rooms above, a house where the warmed air drifted upward and out through a tall chimney on the south wall, a house that did this not with engines, not with electricity, not with fuel of any kind, but simply with the laws of stone and air and the patient, unchanging warmth of the earth. A house that needed no man to defend it from winter. A house that once sealed and set in motion would breathe by itself. Forever. She closed the book. She put her hands over her face. She thought, this is the rambling of a madman. She thought, this is the most beautiful idea I have ever read. She thought, he is dead. He is dead 100 years. And I am sitting in his chair and reading his words, and his words are perhaps the only thing standing between my children and a winter that will kill them. Then she lit a new candle. She turned to the first diagram, and she began to take notes. Caleb became her apprentice on the second day. She did not plan it that way. She had meant to keep him out of it. But she came up from the cellar with a piece of charcoal, and a flat board on which she had copied a diagram, and he was already standing at the top of the stairs. His face was very serious. "I can read it," he said. "It's complicated, baby. I can read it, Mama. Show me." She showed him. He did not understand the words, plenum, siphon, lithic mass, but he understood the lines. He understood that the lines were pipes, and the pipes were under the ground, and the pipes brought air in from one side and out the other. He nodded, slow, once. "It's a machine." "Yes." "And we have to fix the machine." "Yes." "Then we'll be warm." "Yes." A long pause. Then he said, "Mama, we will fix it." He was 8 years old, and he sounded like Bennett. He sounded so much like Bennett that for a moment she could not speak. She put her hand on the back of his neck, just for a second. Then she rolled up her sleeves. The first task was the north intake. According to the diagrams, a low stone arch was set into the slope on the cold side of the cottage. A mouth. The mouth through which the whole house breathed. And according to Ezekiel's last entry dated the autumn of 1893, before he sealed the cellar door and never wrote in the journal again, the arch had been buried. Not by accident, on purpose, because the house had been left alone for the winter, and he had wanted no animal to make a nest inside it. She found the arch on the third day. It took her 6 hours. She dug with a small spade. She dug with a rusted iron bar. She dug with her hands. The slope was hard. The ground was full of stones the size of her fist and the size of her head. She moved a slide of dirt and roots and pieces of rotted root cap that had grown over the arch in 130 years. Caleb hauled away the smaller rocks in a bucket. His face was set. He did not speak. Junie was given the job of moss. The diagrams said dry moss made an excellent insulator for the flue cap. So Junie collected moss, tufts of it, patches of it. She brought it back in handfuls and laid it out flat in the sun on a wide rock. She hummed while she did this, a small, high, tuneless humming, a 6-year-old's hymn. Marin listened to it while she dug. She thought, I have not heard her hum since April. She thought, please let this work. She thought, please let me not be killing my children. The arch came clear on the third evening, a perfect curve of fitted stone set into the slope of the hill like a small open mouth waiting to drink. She knelt in front of it. She pulled out the last of the dirt with her fingers. She looked into the dark, cool throat of the channel that ran back from the arch into the deep places under the house. It was not blocked. It was not collapsed. It was waiting. She put her hand against the stone arch. She said very quietly, hello. She did not know who she was saying it to, but she said it. The mortar was the hardest part. The journal was exacting. 2 parts Blue River clay, 1 part fine granite dust, 1 part horsehair, mixed with just enough spring water to make a stiff, unyielding paste. She found the clay by the spring, a thick, greasy seam of it, blue-gray, the kind of clay that clung to a boot and would not let go. She harvested it in slabs. She carried it up the slope in buckets that bruised the inside of her arms. the granite dust she made by smashing rocks. She and Caleb sat on a flat ledge for 2 days, taking turns with a heavy hammer. They smashed rocks into smaller rocks. They smashed smaller rocks into chips. They smashed chips into powder. The powder rose in fine clouds and got in their hair and their eyes and the inside of their throats. Their faces by the end of each day were the color of dust. Junie called it ghost work. She was not entirely wrong. But the horsehair was a problem, because there was no horse. Maren sat by the spring with the journal open across her knees, and she stared at the line of black ink that said horsehair, and she felt the small, clean panic of a person who has come within reach of a thing and discovered the last small, impossible bridge. No horse, no farm, no barn, no neighbor's barn either, because the only neighbor was Mr. Whitaker, and Mr. Whitaker had a milk cow and 3 chickens, and that was all. She sat there a long time. The wind moved the grass, and after a while she put her hand up to her own head. Her hair was long. Her hair was very long. She had not cut it since before Bennett died, because Bennett had loved it long, because cutting it would have felt like saying goodbye to him, because every morning when she pinned it up she could feel him standing behind her with his hand at the small of her back. Her hair. She went into the cottage. She came out with a kitchen knife. Junie watched her with wide eyes. "Mama, what are you doing?" "I'm doing the work, baby." "Mama, not your hair." "It's just hair, baby." It was not just hair. She cut it short, above the shoulders, hank by hank. She let each hank fall into a tin bucket. The pile inside the bucket grew, dark, soft, useless to her now, necessary to the house. When she was done, she looked into the broken piece of mirror that hung by the door. A stranger looked back. A thin woman with a hard mouth and hair cut like a soldier's. She did not cry, but she put one hand against the mirror, just for a moment. "I'm sorry, Bennett," she said. The mirror said nothing. Then she turned and she saw Junie standing in the doorway, watching her, with a face like a small old woman's. "Mama." "Yes, baby. Take mine too." "Junie, take mine too, Mama. It's just hair." Maren knelt on the floor, and she pulled her 6-year-old daughter into her arms, and she did not let her cry, and she did not cry herself. And after a while she took the kitchen knife, and she trimmed Junie's long, pale hair to just above her shoulders, and she added it to the bucket, mother and daughter, in the same bucket. For the walls of a house built by a dead man who had known a face that looked exactly like the face of the grandmother Junie had never met. They mixed the mortar that night. The next afternoon, Mrs. Pemberton came up the hill. Maren saw her from a distance, a small, thin woman in a dark wool coat, walking slow, steady, picking her way up the goat path with a wooden cane, a leather satchel over one shoulder, a blue scarf tied under her chin. She stopped at the broken gate. She did not call out. She just stood, looking at the cottage. Maren came down from the slope, wiping the clay from her hands on her trousers. "Ma'am." The old woman did not answer at first. She looked at Maren. Then she looked past Maren at the door of the cottage. Then she looked back at Marin. Her eyes filled. "Oh," she said, soft. "Oh, my dear." Marin stopped walking. "Ma'am, can I help you?" The old woman raised one thin hand. The hand shook. "I have been waiting," she said, "for 61 years to see your face." The world went very quiet. The wind kept moving across the ridge. The grass kept moving. But Marin could not hear any of it. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't know you." "No," the old woman said. "You don't. But I knew your grandmother. And I knew her mother. And I knew her mother's mother. I don't have a grandmother. She passed when my mama was 9. "Yes," Mrs. Pemberton said. "Margaret Hollister. I was at the funeral. I was 11 years old. My father was the school teacher in town. Margaret was my mother's best friend in this world." Marin stood very still. "What did you say?" "Margaret Hollister, dear. My grandmother's maiden name was Howard." "Yes," Mrs. Pemberton said. "She married a Howard, and before that, before she was a wife, she was Margaret Hollister, and before that, she was the granddaughter of the man who built this house." The world tilted, just slightly, the way a room tilts when you have been sitting too long and you stand up too fast. "That's not," Marin said. "That's not. My mother never said." "No," the old woman said, gentle. "Your mother didn't know. Margaret didn't tell her. Margaret didn't tell anyone. The town had made up its mind about this place by then, dear. And Margaret had her own troubles. She left the ridge as a young woman. She made a new name. She buried where she came from." Marin could not speak. Mrs. Pemberton walked slowly forward. She stopped a few feet away. "My dear," she said, "your great-grandfather built this house. Your great-grandfather was Ezekiel Hollister. And the woman in the photograph in the cellar, the one with your mother's face." A pause. "That is your great-great-grandmother, Eleanor Hollister, your blood, all the way down." Marin's knees folded. She sat down. Right there in the grass, the bucket of clay in her hand, the wind moving across her cut-short hair. She did not cry. She did not cry. But something inside her unlatched. A small door she had not known was there. A door at the very back of her chest. And on the other side of it was a feeling she had never felt before. The feeling that she had not, after all, washed up on this ridge by accident. The feeling that she had come home. Mrs. Pemberton lowered herself onto a flat rock with the careful slowness of an 80-year-old. She set her cane across her knees. She watched Marin with a tenderness that was almost unbearable. "I have been watching this ridge for 60 years, she said. "I am the only person left in this town who remembers what was here before they called it the grave. I taught the school for 41 years. I taught Mr. Whitaker. I taught Mr. Whitaker's children. And every fall I would walk up this hill and I would sit on this rock and I would look at the old stones and I would think, somebody belongs there. Somebody is supposed to be there. Why have you left her empty so long, Lord? A small laugh, soft and wet. And then last week, Mr. Whitaker came to my door, and he told me a young widow had bought Lot 74 with 2 children, with a name I did not know, with a face. Mrs. Pemberton looked up. With a face, my dear, that I knew the moment I saw you walk down that slope just now. Because you have your great-grandmother's eyes, and you have your grandmother's mouth, and you have come home. Marin put her face in her hands, and then she did cry. For the first time since the day they buried Bennett. Not loud, not violent, just a slow, steady leaking, the way a thaw leaks, the way snow turns to water when winter finally lets go. Mrs. Pemberton did not move. She let her cry. She knew that some kinds of crying are sacred, and some kinds of crying you do not interrupt. After a long time, Marin wiped her face with the back of her clay-stained hand. "Why," she said, "why didn't anybody tell us? Why didn't anybody come find us?" Because nobody knew where Margaret went, dear. She did not want to be found. The town was cruel to her after her father died, and she was a proud woman. The Hollisters were a proud line. They are your line. Why was the town cruel? Mrs. Pemberton thought a moment. Because they didn't understand him, dear. Ezekiel. They didn't understand a man who said the earth had a heartbeat. They thought he was a heretic, or a fool, or both. And after he died and the house stood empty and the wind kept on, and people forgot how it worked. A small shrug. Folks always punish what they don't understand, especially the dead. She reached into her satchel. "I brought you something." She drew out a small bundle, cloth-wrapped, twine-tied. "Margaret left this to my mother. My mother left it to me, and I have kept it 60 years not knowing who I was keeping it for, until now." She held it out. Marin took it. Her hands trembled. "What is it?" Mrs. Pemberton smiled. "Pages, my dear. Pages from your great-grandfather's journal. The ones he tore out before he sealed the cellar. The ones he gave to his daughter when he knew he was dying. The ones she gave to her daughter. And so on, until they came to me." A pause. "There is something in there, dear, that the journal in the cellar does not tell you. About the house." "What?" "I haven't read them, dear. They are not mine to read. They are yours." The wind moved across the ridge. Marin looked down at the small cloth bundle in her hands. She felt as though she were holding the entire weight of 138 years. 3 days later, Conrad came up the hill. She heard the truck before she saw it. His new truck. The dark blue one with the chrome bumper and the lift kit he had bought himself a month after Bennett's funeral, with money that should have been hers and the children's. She was on her knees in front of the north arch when she heard him. She did not stand up. She was packing the new mortar, the hair-bound clay, the river silt, the granite dust into a thermal joint, described in Ezekiel's hand 130 years ago. Her fingers were numb. Her shoulders were on fire. She did not stand up when Conrad walked around the corner of the cottage in his shine boots. He stopped. He looked at her. He laughed. It was a small, mean laugh. A laugh he was very proud of. "Marin," he said. "Marin, Marin, Marin, look at you." She did not look at him. "You cut your hair." She did not answer. "You're packing mud into a wall. I heard in town. I didn't believe it. But here you are." She wiped her hands. "What do you want, Conrad?" "To see how you're getting on." "You can see." "I can. I can indeed." He walked closer. The boots crunched on the gravel. He stopped at a safe distance as a man does when he visits a kennel. "Marin, I've been thinking. The offer still stands. 500 is not nothing. The Greyhound runs out of the depot every Friday at 10. South, Florida, Texas. Somewhere a woman can find work. Somewhere those kids can be in a real school, not." He waved a hand at the ridge. "This." She kept packing the mortar. "You're doing this to spite me," he said. "You know that. You're doing this because you want everyone to see." Look how cruel Conrad was. "But Marin, they are starting to talk. In town. They are saying you've lost your mind. They are saying those children are at risk. And eventually, Marin, eventually somebody is gonna call the county." Her hands paused, just for a second. Then she kept packing. "You don't want them to call the county, Marin. Get off my land, Conrad. This is not your land. This is a parcel of granite somebody sold you for $450 because they felt sorry for the children. I could give those children a real home. I could give those children a proper school and proper food and a proper Christmas. Marin, I am their uncle. I have a right. Get off my land." Caleb came around the corner. He was carrying a length of pipe, not as a weapon, as a tool. He had been measuring something, but he stopped when he saw the man. For one long second, he did not move. He did not speak. He simply looked at his uncle, with an expression Marin had not seen on her son's face before. Then he set the pipe down, very carefully. He walked across the gravel. He stopped between Conrad and his mother. He was not quite 4 feet tall. He looked up. "You're standing on her land," he said. "She told you to leave." Conrad opened his mouth. "Leave," Caleb said. Conrad's face went a strange color. "Boy, you don't speak to me like." "Leave." 3 feet 11 inches of 8-year-old boy, with his father's jaw, and his mother's eyes, and a length of pipe just behind him on the ground. Conrad looked at his nephew. Then he looked at his sister-in-law. Then he looked at the cottage, at the patched roof, at the closed door, at the small, clean smoke that did not seem to be coming out of any chimney. And something in his face flickered. For just a heartbeat. Not shame, not fear. Calculation. The expression of a man who has come to assess the value of something. Then it was gone, replaced by the old sneer. "Have it your way," he said. He turned. He walked back down the slope to his truck. He did not slam the door. He drove away slow. The way a man drives when he wants to be sure he has been seen leaving. Caleb did not move until the engine could no longer be heard. Then he turned around, walked to his mother, sat down beside her in the dirt. picked up a handful of mortar, and began to pack it very carefully into the joint right beside hers. She did not look at him. If she looked at him, she would weep. She just bumped her shoulder against his once. He bumped his back once. They worked side by side until the light went. Reverend Hale came on a Tuesday. He was a small gray man in a black coat. He had a face that had spent 40 years listening to other people's sorrows. He came up the hill on foot. He carried a Bible under his arm and a cake tin in one hand and a small folded handkerchief in his coat pocket that he took out twice during the walk up the slope to wipe his face. Marin met him at the door. "Mrs. Holloway, Reverend, my wife sent a coffee cake. Thank her for me." "I will." A pause. "May I sit a moment?" She made him coffee on the small iron stove. She set out the only 2 chairs. He sat. He drank. He looked around the inside of the cottage. He noticed that it was not cold. He did not remark on it. He was a careful man. After a while, he said, "Marin, I came to tell you something. I do not enjoy telling it, but I think you ought to know. Yes. 3 days ago, Conrad Holloway came to the parish office. He asked me to write a letter." "What letter?" "A letter of concern to the County Family Services Office about the welfare of the children. He asked me to sign as the family's spiritual advisor." She set down her cup. "Did you sign it?" "No, ma'am." "Why not?" "Because what I have seen here, Marin, are children in good hands. And what I saw in Conrad's eyes when he asked me to sign was not concern." A pause. It was a man trying to clear ground. Outside, the wind moved. "Reverend, what ground?" He set down his coffee. He looked at her for a long moment. "Marin, I'm going to tell you something that was told to me in confidence. I'm going to tell you because I think the breaking of that confidence is the lesser sin. Tell me, Conrad is in debt. He has been in debt since before your husband died. The farm has not turned a profit in 3 years. He has been borrowing against it, and against the equipment, and against the land." "How much?" "Enough that the bank will take the farm in spring." She closed her eyes. "Last summer, before your husband passed, Conrad began conversations with a development company. They are interested in this ridge, the whole length of it. They want to put up vacation cottages, 40 units, with a road graded all the way to the top. They have offered him a sum that would clear his debts, pay him out, and leave him a profit. The deal was nearly closed." He took a small breath. "The deal requires every parcel along the ridge, including Lot 74. The cottage was very quiet. He never told Bennett." "No, ma'am, I do not believe he did." "And then Bennett died." "Yes." "And Bennett's will, the old will, gave everything to Conrad." "Yes." "And then I, of all the people on the earth, walked into the clerk's office and bought the only parcel he needed." "Yes." Her hand went to her mouth. "Reverend, he needs me gone." "Yes." "He needs me gone before the snow." "Yes, ma'am. I believe that is exactly the truth of it." The fire in the stove made a small, soft sound. She put her face in her hands. After a long minute, she lifted it again. "Reverend Hale, is it wrong of me to stay?" The old man looked at her with eyes the color of weak tea. "Marin, I've been a pastor in this town since I was 26. I've buried 417 people. I have married 288 couples. I have baptized more babies than I can count. And the one thing I have learned in all of that is that what is right is rarely the thing that is easy." He paused. "You are standing on the land of your ancestors, with the work of your ancestors in your hands, and your children at your side. Marin, if this is not where you are meant to be, then I do not know what meant to be means." He stood. He picked up his coat. He paused at the door. "I will pray for you." "Thank you, Reverend." "And Marin, yes. Lock your door at night." She watched him walk down the slope, the black coat against the brown grass, the Bible under one arm. She watched until he was very small. Then she went inside, and she sat down at the table, and she unwrapped the cloth bundle Mrs. Pemberton had left her. The missing pages. The pages Ezekiel had torn from his own journal before he sealed the cellar door. She had not read them yet. She had been afraid to. She had wanted to wait until the work was almost done. But now, she lit the candle. She unfolded them carefully. The paper was brittle. The ink was faint. But the handwriting was the same as the journal below. She read. For 1 full hour, she read. And what she found in those pages stopped her breath, because Ezekiel had written in his last days of a second secret. Not the cellar, not the channels, not the thermal joints, something else. He had written of a second heart in the house. He had written that he had not trusted all of his designs to the great journal in the cellar. He had written that some of his work, the most delicate of it, was hidden in a place that only a Hollister of the blood would find. He had written that one day when the house was in need, the second heart would speak. And then in the last line, before the pages ran out in an ink so faded that she had to bring the candle within an inch of the page to read it, he had written, "The wall remembers what the floor forgets." That was all. That was the whole line. That was the whole secret. She read it 3 times. She did not know what it meant. She folded the pages. She put them away. And she went back to work. The work was almost done now. 2 weeks of clay. 2 weeks of granite dust. 2 weeks of crawling through narrow black channels under the floor with a candle clamped between her teeth. Her hands had become a stranger's hands, hard, cracked, strong. She had repacked every joint. She had cleared every vent. She had laid new mesh over every opening Ezekiel had specified. She had run a thin line of tallow around the rim of the iron trap door. On the last evening of the 3rd week, she stood with Caleb at her side, looking down at the cellar door. "We're going to close it now, baby. Forever. For a long time. Will we ever open it again?" She thought about that. "Only if the house needs us to." He nodded. Slow. Together they lowered the heavy iron slab. The sound it made when it settled into place was not the bang of a closing door. It was a deep, soft thud. The thud of a thing finishing what it had been waiting 138 years to finish. She slid the flagstone back over it. She stood up. She put her hand on the hearth. She did not say anything out loud, but inside her chest she said, "We are here, Ezekiel. We have come back." That night, for the first time, the floor under her feet was not cold. It was not warm either. It was neutral. A clean, steady neutral. The way the inside of a cave is neutral. The way the deep earth is neutral. She put her bare hand against the flagstone in front of the alcove where the children slept. She could feel a temperature. A temperature. Not the absence of cold. A temperature. She lit a candle. She held the flame near one of the small floor-level slats in the wall. The flame did not flicker outward. It bent gently inward. Drawn by a slow, steady current of air, she could not feel on her skin. The house was breathing. It had begun. She did not sleep that night either. She lay between her children. She listened to the small, fine current of moving air. She listened to Junie's even sleeping breath, and Caleb's even sleeping breath, and the steady, deep silence of stone walls that no longer let the cold in. And then, very softly from outside, the first hard sound of sleet against the windows. The radio in the next room hissed alive on its small battery. A man's voice, faint, calm, practiced. A weather advisory from the National Weather Service for the entire mountain region, effective immediately. A polar mass had been gathering for 2 weeks off the Canadian border. It was moving south, faster than expected, larger than expected. The temperatures it would bring had not been recorded since 1899. The wind speeds it would bring had not been recorded ever. The snowfall, the man said, would be measured not in inches but in feet. The storm would arrive within 48 hours. The storm would last as long as it lasted. He said twice with the careful flatness of a man who has been told to keep people calm. Residents should make peace with the possibility of being on their own. Marin reached out in the dark. She turned the radio off. She lay there a long time. She put one hand on her son's shoulder, the other hand on her daughter's small, soft head. Outside, the wind began to rise. Inside, the house was breathing. She thought of the missing pages, of the line in faded ink. The wall remembers what the floor forgets. She did not know what it meant, but she had the feeling lying there in the dark between her children, with 138 years of her own blood beneath her, that she was gonna find out. Very soon. The storm came down the ridge at noon on the second day. It did not announce itself. It did not build slow. It came the way a door slams when the wind takes it. One moment the sky was a hard pale gray. The next moment the world was white. Marin was at the south window when it hit. She had been watching for it. She had been watching for an hour. The pine on the far side of the slope had begun to move. The grass had laid flat. The light had thinned to almost nothing. And then the white wall came down off the ridge like the hand of God. She stepped back from the glass. "Caleb?" "Yes, Mama." "Sit by your sister." "Yes, Mama." The wind hit the cottage 1 full second after she saw it hit the pines. It struck the south wall like a freight car. The stone shuddered. The window glass groaned. A small, fine cloud of dust came down from a beam overhead that had not been disturbed since 1888. Junie screamed. Caleb pulled her against him. Maren did not move. She stood in the center of the room with her arms at her sides, and she listened. To the wind, to the stone, to the small, fine current of moving air in the slats by the floor, to the slow, steady pulse of a house that had been built to do this. The wind howled. The walls held. The floor was warm. She did not pray. She did not cry. She did not sit down. She walked slowly to the alcove. She lay down beside her children. She put one arm over each of them, and she said, very quietly, "It's all right. The house knows what it's doing." By dark, the windows were gone. Not broken. Buried. A foot of snow on the sill. Then 2. Then 3. The light from outside went from white to gray to the deep blue of a sea cave. The wind did not stop. It rose and fell and rose again, but it did not stop. It would not stop. It was a thing that had decided. The radio gave them 4 hours. Then it died. Maren did not turn it back on. She did not have batteries to waste. Inside the cottage, the thermometer on the table held at 53. 53. She stared at it. She picked it up. She shook it. She set it down. 53. In a stone shell on a granite ridge in the worst blizzard recorded since the century turned. With no fire, no fuel, no engine of any kind. 53. She made the children a stew. Potatoes from Mr. Whitaker's sack. A scrap of bacon. Salt. She cooked it on the small iron stove on the smallest of fires. The fire was for cooking, not for heat. The house did the heat. They ate at the table. 3 bowls, 3 spoons. Junie was the first to speak. "Mama." "Yes, baby." "Are we going to die?" Maren set down her spoon. She looked at her daughter, at the small, round face, at the eyes that had not slept properly in 8 weeks, at the hair that was now the same length as her own because they had cut it for the walls. No, baby. Promise. She did not lie to her children. She had not lied to her children once since their father had died. So she thought about it for a long, honest moment. She thought about the wind and the cold and the 53 degrees on the thermometer and the food in the sack and the candle stub on the table. Then she said, "I promise." And she meant it. Because she meant it, Junie believed it. And because Junie believed it, Junie ate her stew and she yawned and she leaned against her brother, and within 10 minutes she was asleep in his lap with her mouth open and a smear of broth on her chin. Caleb looked across the table at his mother. His eyes were old. "Mama." "Yes, baby. You don't have to promise me anything. I already know." She could not answer that. She just reached across the table. She put her hand over his. She held it. for a very long time. The storm did not stop for 3 days. The wind howled and softened and howled again. Snow piled against the north wall until the snow itself became a kind of insulation. Junie pressed her ear against the stone one morning and said in a small, wondering voice, "Mama, the house is quiet." It was true. The walls, the deep stone walls Ezekiel had laid in 1888, with their hair-bound mortar and their fitted joints and their breathing channels, the walls held the world out and the warmth in. The house breathed slow. The house breathed steady. The cycle did not stop. The cycle did not falter. The cycle had been waiting 138 years to be turned on again, and now that it was turning, it did not care about the storm. The storm could go on as long as it wanted. The house had time. On the second night, they ran out of candles. Maren found 2 more in the wooden crate from the cellar, old, yellowed, smelling faintly of beeswax and another century. She lit one. It burned with a clean, tall flame. She read to the children from the small Bible Reverend Hale had left behind. She read the Psalms, not because she was certain anymore what she believed, but because the words were old, and the words were beautiful, and the words had been spoken by women in cold houses on long nights for 3,000 years. And she felt in some way she could not have explained that she was joining a chorus. Junie fell asleep on the second psalm. Caleb stayed awake. He was looking at the wall by the alcove. "Mama." "Yes, baby." "What does that mean?" "The wall remembers what the floor forgets." She had told him about the missing pages, about the line in faded ink, about the second heart. She had told him because she had needed to tell someone, and because he was her partner in this the way a husband is sometimes a partner, the way Bennett had once been. "I don't know yet, baby. It's in here." "What is?" "The second heart. It's in here. In the house. He wrote that. So it's in here. We just haven't found it." "Yes. So we should look." "Caleb, there's a storm. There's been a storm for 2 days, Mama. And we're not doing anything else." She looked at him. He was 8. He was right. So they began to look. They searched the cottage by candlelight, inch by inch, stone by stone. Maren ran her hands along every joint of every wall. She knocked. She listened. She pressed. Caleb did the same lower down with the patience of a small surveyor. They found nothing on the first night. They found nothing on the second night. On the morning of the third day, with the wind still howling and the windows still buried, and the candle stub down to 1/2 inch, Junie woke up early. She stood up in her socks. She walked sleepy and wobbling to the wall by the alcove. She put her hand against the stone the way she had done before when she had marveled at the quiet. Then she yawned, and she leaned, and her small shoulder bumped with all the loose weight of a half-awake 6-year-old against a particular stone at the height of her hip. The stone moved, not much, maybe 1/4 inch, but it moved. There was a small sound, a soft click, the kind of sound a latch makes after 130 years of waiting. Junie's eyes went very wide. "Mama," she said. "Mama, I broke it." Maren was already on her feet. She knelt at the wall. She put her hand against the stone Junie had bumped. She pressed. It moved. It moved like a button moves. Smooth. Engineered. She pressed harder. A whole section of the wall shifted inward. Just an inch. Just an inch. Then a vertical line appeared in the stone. A door. A door that had been there since 1888, and that no eye in 100 years had ever seen. Because the seam had been cut so fine, and because the latch had been hidden under a stone, you would not press unless your shoulder happened to lean against it. A door that opened Ezekiel had written only to a Hollister of the blood, or, as it happened, to a 6-year-old girl with her great-great-great-grandfather's stubborn chin. Maren pulled the door open. It opened on a small alcove set into the thickness of the wall. Not a passage, not a room, just a space, the size of a cupboard, lined with the same fitted stone as the cellar. Inside on a small wooden shelf, 2 things: a second leather-bound book and a long flat metal tube, brass, sealed at both ends. The kind of tube a man uses when he means to keep a thing dry for a very long time. Maren took them out, both of them, with hands that had begun to shake again. She set them on the table. She looked at her children. She said, "We found it." She opened the journal first. Same hand. Same ink. But different paper. Newer paper. The journal had been written later. Years later than the one in the cellar. Ezekiel had been an old man when he wrote it. The script was a little less steady. The diagrams were rougher. But the diagrams were what stopped her. Because the diagrams in the second journal were not diagrams of this house. They were diagrams of other houses. Page after page after page. A house on the high plains. A house in upstate country. A house out west. A house in the hills of the southeast. A house in the high desert. A small school. A church. A cluster of 3 cabins outside a town she did not recognize. A widow's home in the far north. Each one drawn from memory. Each one with notes. Each one with the same kind of channels, the same kind of fitted stones, the same kind of patient breathing system. 31 buildings. She counted them. 31. A note at the bottom of the final page in Ezekiel's hand. Each one is sealed. Each one waits. The world will need them again. The world has not yet learned what it has forgotten. I trust that someday, somewhere, a son or daughter of mine will find these pages, and they will go, and they will open them, and the houses will breathe. Maren put her hand over her mouth. The world had forgotten, but Ezekiel had not. And now she had not either. She picked up the brass tube. She unscrewed one end, slowly. The threads were old, but they had been kept dry. She tilted the tube. A roll of paper slid out into her hand. Newer paper. Newer than the journals. Cream-colored. Folded. 3 sheets. She unfolded them on the table. The first was a deed in Ezekiel's name, to Lot 74, with a clause she did not at first understand. Something about heirs. Something about the protection of the land in perpetuity. legal language that would have meant nothing to her except that one phrase in plain English leapt out. This land and all its works shall pass in every generation to the eldest daughter of the Hollister line, who returns to it of her own will. She read the line twice, 3 times. Her name was not on the page, not yet. But the language of the page was the language of a man who had built a house and a clause designed to wait for her. The second sheet was a list of names, handwritten, continuing across 130 years, each name added by a different hand. Margaret Hollister. Margaret Hollister Howard. A name she did not recognize. Another name she did not recognize. Then, in a hand that was not Ezekiel's, but that she somehow knew by heart, from old letters in a box under her childhood bed, the name Eleanor Howard Holloway, her mother, and under her mother's name a single line in her mother's handwriting. I do not know what this is. I do not know who left it. I keep it because my mother kept it. I will pass it to my daughter. The list ended there. Her name was the next one. The pen for adding it would have been her own. The third sheet was the one she did not expect. She unfolded it. She looked at it for a long time before she understood what she was looking at. It was a letter. The paper was new. The ink was new. The hand was Bennett's. Bennett's handwriting. Her husband's hand, dated 8 months before he died. She made a sound, a small sound. She did not know she made it. Caleb came to her side. Junie came to her side. She read the letter to herself first, because if it was real and not a dream and not a sleepwalker's vision of a thing the heart had needed to invent, if it was real, then she needed to read it once, by herself, before she could read it out loud. She read it. She closed her eyes. She read it again. Then she opened her eyes, and she looked at her children, and she said, "Sit down, both of you. Sit by Mama. I want to read you something Daddy wrote." The children sat. The wind howled. She began. "My Marin, if you are reading this, then I am not where I planned to be. I am sorry. I would have liked to give you this in a different way. I would have liked to give you this myself. 2 years ago, I started looking into your mother's side. You remember? You asked me once on our anniversary why I was so curious. I said I was making you a present. You laughed at me. You said the only present you wanted was for me to take a day off. I am sorry I did not take that day off. But I did make the present." Marin's voice broke. She steadied it. "Your great-grandfather's name was Ezekiel Hollister. He built a stone house on a ridge in this county 138 years ago. The house is on Lot 74. The town has forgotten what the house is. But I found a man named Whitaker, and Mr. Whitaker remembered. And Mr. Whitaker told me a story his mother used to tell him. And then Mr. Whitaker took me to see Mrs. Pemberton. And she had been keeping certain papers for 60 years. Marin, I bought a copy of the deed to Lot 74 in March. I was going to give it to you on your 30th birthday. I was going to take you up there, my love, and walk you through the door of your great-grandfather's house and tell you that you had come home. If you are reading this, then I did not get to do that. And so you have done it yourself. Of course you have. Of course you have, my brave girl. Junie was crying. Caleb was holding his sister so tight, his small knuckles had gone white. Marin's hands were steady. Her voice was steady. She would read this letter. She would read it all the way to the end. She owed that to him. The papers in the tube tell you everything you need. The house is yours. The land is yours. The line is yours. No man can take them from you. Not the bank, not the county, not my brother. If you have read this far, you have already begun the work, and that means you have already found out what kind of woman you are. I always knew, from the first night I met you. Marin, hold the children. Tell them their father loved them more than the sky. Tell Caleb to mind his sister. Tell Junie to grow up and be exactly what she was gonna be. Tell yourself every morning that you are a Hollister of the blood, and that no winter has ever been built that could outlast you. I will be on the other side of the stone. I will be the warm in the floor. I will be the still air in the deep room. I will be wherever you are. I never left. Yours all the years. Bennett. She folded the letter. She held it against her chest. She did not cry. She did not cry until both children had thrown themselves against her and were crying for her. And even then she only cried into the tops of their heads. Quiet the way a mother cries, when she still has to hold her children up. Outside, the wind had begun for the first time in 3 days to fall. When the wind died, the silence was almost worse. Marin stepped out the front door on the morning of the 4th day. She had to push hard against the drift. The snow came up to her waist. The sky above the ridge was a clear, hard blue. The kind of blue you only get after a storm of that kind. The air burned the inside of her nose. The air was colder than anything she had ever known. The world was white. The world was completely, totally white. She climbed the small rise behind the cottage. She shaded her eyes. The town in the valley below was a smudge of low gray roofs almost lost in the white. No smoke, no movement, no sign of life. She stood there for a long time. Then she went back inside. She put on every layer she had. She wrapped Junie in 2 blankets and set her by the stove with a book. She told Caleb to keep watch. She took a length of rope from the cellar crate. She tied one end to the iron handle of the cottage door. She tied the other end around her own waist. "Mama," Caleb said, "where are you going?" "Down." "Why?" "Because nobody else is coming." She walked into the white. She came back 2 hours later. She came back wet to the knee. Her cheeks burned red. Her hands shook so badly inside their gloves that she could not unlatch the cottage door. Caleb opened it for her. She fell forward into the room. He pulled her toward the stove. He pulled off her gloves. He pulled off her boots. He brought her hot water in a cup and made her drink it. She drank. She breathed. She said, "The town is in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Power's been out 3 days. The shelter's generator quit yesterday. Pipes are frozen. They have an old woman with a broken hip. They have a baby. They have a man on a dialysis machine, and the dialysis machine has not run in 2 days. They have 140 people in a school gym with one wood stove between them. How do you know? Because I got close enough to see. Mama. Yes, baby. Did anybody see you? She thought about it. Mr. Whitaker did. What did he say? He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And then he turned around and he started walking back toward the gym. She paused. I think he's coming. I think they're all coming. Up here. Yes. How are they going to get up here? They're going to walk. He stared at her. Mama, there are 140 of them. Yes. This is one room. Yeah. He put his hand against his forehead. The gesture of a small grown man. She caught his wrist. She held it. Caleb. Yes, Mama. They will not all come. They will send the worst off first. We do not have to fit everybody. We only have to fit the people who would not last the next night. How many is that? I don't know. 40. Maybe more. He swallowed. We don't have enough food. No. We don't have enough blankets. No. What are we going to do, Mama? She looked at him. She did not have the answer. So she said the only thing she had. We are going to open the door, baby. And we are going to let them in. And then we will see. They came up the slope at dusk. A small dark line of figures against the white. Picking their way slow. Breaking trail. Falling. Standing back up. Carrying the smallest of them on their backs. Mr. Whitaker was at the front. He had a length of rope around his waist that ran back along the line. He was breaking trail with his long legs and his old man's stubbornness. Behind him in single file, parents carrying children, grown sons carrying their mothers. A young deputy carrying the man on dialysis on a stretcher of 2x4s. And near the back of the line, Marin saw him. Conrad. He was not in his shine boots. He was in a borrowed coat too thin for the cold. He had wrapped a kitchen towel around his face. He was carrying nothing but himself, and he could barely carry that. He was stumbling. Every fifth step. Stumbling. The young deputy was half holding him up. Marin stood in her doorway and she watched her brother-in-law climb the hill she had bought with $500 to be free of him. She did not move from the door. She did not move when Mr. Whitaker climbed onto the porch, breathing hard, his face crusted with ice. She did not move when he pulled off his hat. She did not move when he opened his mouth. He did not say much. He said, "Ma'am, they've got no place else." That was all he said. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "There's room." They came in, one by one, stamping the snow off, pulling off the wet outer layers. Their faces were gray. Their lips were cracked. Their eyes were the eyes of people who had stopped expecting to be warm again. And then they stepped onto the floor. And then their faces changed. Because the floor was warm, not hot, not blazing, but warm. A clean, steady warm. The warm of a hand under a quilt. They knelt. They pressed their gloves against the flagstone. They laughed. Strangers. They laughed and they wept, and they laughed again. A man in his 50s pressed both palms flat to the floor and put his forehead on the back of his own hands and cried. A woman with a baby in a sling sat down right where she was standing and put the baby's bare foot on the stone, and the baby, who had not cooed in 2 days, looked up at the ceiling and made a small, soft sound. Marin stood in the doorway. She watched. She did not know what her own face looked like. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel vindication. She did not feel anything that she had thought she would feel. She felt only the strange, enormous tenderness of a person who has by accident become a roof. Conrad was last in. He stood inside the door. He did not take off his coat. He did not look at her. He looked at the floor. After a long time, he said, "I should not be here." "You're here," she said. "You can throw me out." "I won't." "You could." "I won't." He stood there a long time. Then he sat down, not in a chair, on the floor, right where he was standing. He put his head in his hands. She did not go to him. She had nothing yet to say to him, but she did not throw him out. That was the first sentence of what would between them be a much longer conversation. The community kept the cottage warm by being inside it. That sounds simple. It is not. 43 people. 3 rooms if you counted the alcove and the cellar landing. 1 small iron stove, 1 pot, 2 candles, a handful of blankets, bread baked thin to feed many, stew watered to feed more. Marin did not sleep. Mr. Whitaker did not sleep. Reverend Hale, who had come up with the second wave the next morning, did not sleep. Mrs. Pemberton arrived on the 3rd day, carried on a sled by 2 grown men, and she did not sleep either. She sat in the corner with the babies on her lap, and she told them stories her grandmother had told her grandmother. The hours blurred. The days blurred. The young deputy got the dialysis man stable. A nurse named Rita arrived on the 4th day with insulin from the wreck of the pharmacy. The old woman with the broken hip slept on a thick pile of coats. The baby in the sling began to laugh again and again at the candle flame. They named the baby Hearth just for the week, just for the joke. Her real name was Sarah. Conrad did not speak. He did chores. He cleaned dishes. He carried snow in pots to be melted on the stove. He emptied a slop bucket every morning without being asked. On the 6th day, he came to her. It was very late. The cottage was asleep. The floor pulsed warm. She was at the table with a candle copying pages of the second journal onto fresh paper. Because Reverend Hale had asked her to. Because he had said, "This needs to leave this house, Marin. This needs to leave this house and not come back until it has been printed and bound and put in libraries." Conrad sat down across from her. She did not look up. He said, "Marin." She did not look up. He said, "I have something I need to say. In front of the room. In front of all of them. In the morning. Reverend Hale has asked me to say it. I have agreed." She set down the pen. She looked at him. "What are you going to say?" He swallowed. "The truth, Marin. All of it. The debt. The deal with the developers. The letter to family services. The lawyer. The reason I gave you $500 and a one-way road to nowhere." He stopped. He looked down at his hands. "I'm going to tell them I tried to kill you, Marin. I did not mean it that way, but I did. I gave you $500 and a winter and a child of 6 and a child of 8, and I drove you out of the house. I knew you would die without, and I told myself it was the law and the will and the way things were done. And I am going to say, in front of all of them, that I did it for money, and that I am the kind of man who would do that for money." A long breath. "And after that I will leave. I will leave this town. I will not come back. The farm is yours. The bank will take what the bank will take, and the rest is yours. The papers are at the lawyer's. I have already signed them." He looked up. His face was wet. She had never seen him cry. In the entire time she had known him, she had never once seen him cry. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel vindication. She did not feel any of the things a younger woman might have felt. She felt only a small, slow tiredness. And under the tiredness, a small, slow pity. And under the pity, very far down, something that was almost mercy. Not for him. For Bennett. Who would have wanted mercy? Who had always wanted mercy? Who had loved his brother stupidly, the way men love brothers, the way Marin had never understood. And now maybe finally did. She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. She did not say, "I forgive you." She said, "Bennett would have." And Conrad put his face down on the table, and he wept. She let him, because there is a kind of weeping you do not interrupt. The storm broke on the 8th day. Help came up the road on the 9th. National Guard trucks, state plows, 2 helicopters from a hospital downstate. The dialysis man was airlifted. The old woman with the hip was driven down on a slow, careful sled. The pharmacy was reopened. The school gym was reopened. The town began slowly to remember that it was a town. The cottage emptied out a little at a time. Marin stood in her doorway on the 11th day and watched the last of the families walk down the slope behind a guard truck. They turned, all of them, at the bottom of the rise, and they waved. She waved back. She closed the door. She turned around. Caleb and Junie were on the floor with a book. Mrs. Pemberton was in the rocking chair somebody had carried up. Reverend Hale was making coffee. Mr. Whitaker was nailing a new board to the bottom of the door where the wind had worried it. She thought, "This is my family now." She thought, "I have lost a husband, and I have not gotten one back. And nothing about this is fair. And nothing about this is the same as what I had before. But this is my family now, and the door is closed against the cold. And nobody in this room is alone." The papers found her in March. Reporters from the state capitol, then from a regional paper, then from a national magazine that wrote about old American buildings. They wrote about the house, They wrote about Ezekiel. They wrote with great care about Marin. They did not call her brave. She had asked them not to. They called her instead the woman who listened to a house. She did not love the phrase, but she did not hate it either. In April, a young architect drove up from a college 3 states away. He stayed 2 days. He took photographs of every channel and every joint. He copied diagrams. He cried once in the cellar when he understood what he was looking at. He left. He came back 2 weeks later with 3 more architects, and a structural engineer, and a professor of historic preservation. By the end of the summer, the second journal had been transcribed into a printed book. Marin had final approval over every page. The book was sold at cost. The proceeds came to a foundation Marin had set up under Reverend Hale's advice. The foundation had one purpose. It would slowly and carefully find the other 30 buildings Ezekiel had drawn. It would open them. It would teach the rest of the world what one man on one ridge had known 138 years ago and had trusted no one to lose forever. Marin did not run the foundation. She would not. She let the architects run it. She let Mrs. Pemberton sit on the board. She let Reverend Hale handle the money. What she did was teach. She held classes in the old farmhouse Conrad had left her. She turned the farmhouse into a school. She did not call it a school. She called it the long room. Women came from 3 counties over. Some of them were her age. Some of them were Mrs. Pemberton's age. Some of them were 16 and pregnant and had nowhere else to go. She taught them what she had learned about clay and stone and the patient, unchanging warmth of the deep earth. She taught them mostly that a woman who has been put out on the porch with 2 children and $500 can, if she will not give up, build a roof. Junie turned 7 that spring. Caleb turned 9. They did not look like the same children. Or maybe they did. Maybe they were the same children they had always been. Maybe Marin had only just learned to see them properly. One evening in late May, Marin sat on the small stone porch of the cottage. The wind moved across the ridge, not as a predator, not as a hand, as itself, as the breath of the world. Junie and Caleb were chasing the first fireflies of the year. Junie was laughing. Junie was laughing the way a child laughs who has forgotten she ever did not laugh. Mrs. Pemberton sat in the rocker beside her, a blanket on her knees. The cottage was warm at her back. The floor inside, even now in the soft May twilight, was the same neutral, patient temperature it had been on the first night the system had begun to breathe. Mrs. Pemberton said, "He'd be proud of you. You know. Ezekiel. Bennett." Marin did not answer for a long minute. Then she said, "I know. He was a good man, your husband. Yes. You were both lucky. Yes." Marin reached into her coat. She pulled out the small, folded letter. She had carried it every day. It was getting soft along the creases. She would soon have to put it away in a box. But not yet. Not yet. She unfolded it. She did not read it. She knew it by heart. She said quietly to nobody in particular, "I never left." The wind moved. Junie caught a firefly in her cupped hands. She held it up to the dark. The light pulsed inside her fingers, yellow, soft, steady. She brought it to her mother. "Mama, Mama, look. I see baby. Should I let him go?" "Yes, baby. Let him go." Junie opened her hands. The small light rose up. It floated past Marin's face. It rose into the dark above the ridge. It joined the other lights. It became a part of the slow, patient breathing of the world. Marin watched it until she could not see it anymore. Then she put her arm around her daughter, and she pulled her son close on the other side. And she sat on the porch of the house her great-grandfather had built, and her husband had found, and she had carried, and she breathed in, and she breathed out. The house was warm, the world was wide, and she was at last exactly where she was meant to be.